So I'm in my car again and I have some downtime, and I was thinking about our relationship to time and how we process what's happening in Ukraine. And it struck me that you really have to wrap your mind around this and understand your relationship to time and how you view your relationship to time in order to see this clearly. Here's what I mean. There's three different levels that I want to talk about. The first is like we're an instant society. Like we're used to seeing things happen quickly. The Kerch Bridge gets hit, we know within a couple hours. A drone strike hits Moscow, we know in minutes. Something else happens, and you're seeing it on Twitter. It's coming up in our news feed. Think back to World War II. And you'd have to go to the movies to watch a movie reel of news before the movie in order to find out what was happening, or perhaps you'd get it in the paper the next day or shortly thereafter. So we expect things to happen instantaneously. Now, things aren't happening instantaneously on the battlefield. And World War II is actually a really good example of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Like, we're expecting things to happen now within our modern framework of time, but the battlefield looks much more like World War II. Like, they don't have air superiority. Like, at least in World War II, on D-Day, they stormed the beaches and they could even put airborne troops behind the Nazis. Ukraine doesn't have the air power to drop the airborne troops, right? They don't have air power to take on. So they're pre-World War II in some aspects of the machinery that they have. Like, they do have some airplanes, but they don't have this kind of air power. So we're expecting instant modern results with pre-World War II kind of tactics, like clearing a minefield where they can hit you, but you have to just try to get through it. Okay. And so for the analogy, I want you to think in terms of this. Like, let's roll back the clock to 1945. And if you wanted to communicate with someone, you would send a letter. Okay, maybe you could call, but if you wanted to send something in writing, you'd send a letter. It would take a couple of days to get there. Now you send an email or a text. And pre-World War II, if you wanted to research what was going on about whatever phenomenon grabbed you, you'd go to a library, pour over books that may or may be out of date for hours. Today, you Google it. If you wanted to cook a meal, it would take you hours to cook that meal. And then what would happen? Well, you would spend time cooking from scratch. Now, you pop it in the microwave for 10 minutes and it's done. Pre-World War II, if you wanted to go do a banking transaction, you'd go to the bank, stand in line, take this out, do whatever. Yeah, I understand you could cut a check, but if you want to really deposit or add, now you can take a picture of a check and it's deposited to your account. So all those are analogies of like the difference in time. Now we're thinking in modern time, but we really ought to be thinking in like what it was like back then. So one more example of this, my kids have no idea what it was like, how time kind of warps the way you see things. Einstein talked about that in the theory of relativity, like being on the train. Maybe that's not the greatest example because many of you haven't read that, but time is somewhat relative. Okay, so when you're a kid, and now I'm talking to an audience that's mostly 50 and up. I know that from my Google Analytics, that most of you are older than me. So you remember what it was like when you had to get up on Saturday morning to watch Saturday morning cartoons because you didn't have the luxury of any cartoon that you want anytime. Like my kids just don't get it. We're expecting that any cartoon, anytime kind of world environment to be giving instant results on the battlefield, when what we're really in is when we grew up, cartoons, we have to wait, and we just have to wait. Okay, so the instantaneous, the time lag that we should be thinking of because of the equipment that they have is important. And then there's one other thing, and I absolutely hate to talk about this, but I think it's reality. Okay, and I'm going to try to tell you what I think is the real picture. We're on day 400 and I don't know, 35 or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is. 445, something in that neighborhood. Putin invaded thinking that in 3 days he would essentially capture Kyiv and mop up in 3 weeks and that sort of thing. He did that because his framework of time was that he was going to be able to knock this out in no time flat. That we're talking about it on day 440-ish something is really a feather in Ukraine's cap that they've been able to withstand what Russia has been doing so long. Now, do I want it to be over by day 450 or something? Well, absolutely. I want it to be over in short order. but I don't think we're going to get there. I mean, I don't think that's a reality. What I mean by that is, like, on New Year's, I was saying, I think we're going to be back this time next year still talking about Ukraine. And I think it's possible, and gosh, I hate to say this, and I hope I'm wrong. I think it's possible that we're going to be talking about Ukraine and how Ukraine is still rolling back Russia's aggression on day 1000. I hate to say it, but I think that that's probable. Now, if you see in the context of time a limited war, which is what Putin thought he was going to get to, and he thought he was going to be able to mop it up in just a few weeks or maybe even a few months and then have his annexation party or whatever, that changes the way that you approach it. If he thought that he would still be fighting on day 1000, and I hope it's over by then and that Ukraine has prevailed, but if he thought that he would still be fighting on day 1000, he probably wouldn't have started this. And so that changes our perspective as well. So Ukraine just got F-16s. And I talked about this in my earlier video. Ukraine got F-16s, and it's not going to have that much of an impact right now. I just read there was 11 nations supporting the training in for F-16s. I might have had that wrong, but I think there were 11 nations. The UK and Greece just signed on, and the United States and Denmark and a bunch of other stuff, right? So it's going to happen, but it won't happen instantaneously. It'll take months to train. It won't really have a significant impact until next year. So time. But in the broader, if you expand the aperture, if you open the lens and you start thinking about how, yeah, it'll take time, but on day 1000, those jets that have been brought to bear are going to be pretty significant as a force. Right? So it might not be that big of an effect on day 550. It might not even be that big of an effect on day 600. But by day 700, yeah, it will. And I think we're going to be in days, in more days than we would like it to be. But the more that it goes on, if you have a long span of time, this war looks incredibly different than if you have just a short span of time. And so that's what I want to bring to your mind. We have to stop thinking about instantaneous, like we got spoiled with the Kharkiv rollback of the Russian forces. They were unprepared for it. They fled, they left weapons behind, they did all kinds of things wrong, and it was a blitz. But now they've had 6 months to prepare, and we're acting like the Ukrainians should be able to blitz when there are 6 months to prepare. Now, once they get through those first minefields, maybe something will change and be significant, but they have to do that. And then if the war freezes again over the winter or muddy season or whatever it is, you're going to see the same kind of thing where they have time to prepare. So I'm urging you to think in terms of how time changes the way that you're thinking. Don't be despondent. Don't think, oh, how can it happen? Or how can it be so long? Or no, it's a feather in their cap that they're still going. And it's going to be a longer engagement than we thought. So I hope that that's somehow encouraging to you. I know that talking about day 1000 is not really a comforting prospect, but it is in a weird way when you think about it. Okay, that's all that I have right now. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.